Mafia Town, huh? Yeah, you can say I've heard about it. Know about its people, its food, its architecture. Most importantly, though, I know a thing or two about its past. Folks, welcome to Betafied, a series where we take a look at the unused, cut, and changed content of the game, and figure out what it was used for, and why it got cut. Today's episode marks a special occasion, as we're going to be beginning our descent into the massive timeline that is the development of Mafia Town. So grab your official Gears for Breakfast Hat Kid plushies. My name is Wolfclock, and today we're going to be taking a look at the first ever mission of A Hat in Time. Before we begin talking about what the first level was, I need to explain the timeline of A Hat in Time's early development. You may be thinking, if this is about the first mission of the game, shouldn't you just be starting at the beginning? Well, unfortunately, the answer is a bit more complicated than going back to the beginning and doing things chronologically. You see, A Hat in Time's early development was, in a way, sort of confusing. To clear things up, we refer to the game's development by a handful of different eras. Starting from the beginning of the game's development in 2012 onward, the earliest development portion of the game is what we like to call the UDK game era, and it is named as such because lead developer Jonas Karlov named his development videos UDK Game Day Blank for each video he made. We don't have any footage of these old videos, unfortunately, but we do have a handful of screenshots. Just a handful. Moving on from that is an era we refer to as the Harbor era, based off the assumed name of the level, since all remaining assets of this era are referred to as Harbor assets. We have a small handful of videos from this era, but we fortunately have large amounts of assets, including a version of the map itself, thank you Haboy, and screenshots from this portion of development. Next up, we have an era that we like to call the Calcite era, which is when the first version of what finally becomes in Mafia Town is established. We call this era Calcite because some development videos refer to Mafia Town as the City of Calcite and Adventure, which is also the name of the first music track made for Mafia Town. This portion of time lasted around the end of 2012 and start of 2013, and is when things started to take shape into what we have today. Following this, there was the prototype era, the alpha, and the beta eras of the game, but I feel like we don't really need to go into deep discussion about those portions of development. What we're going to be looking at today is a particular mission from the Calcite era of development, and seemingly had its roots in the latest stages of the Harbor era. You may remember a particular archive development video I had uploaded a while back dated January 26, 2013, titled A Hat in Time, First Mission, New Water, Stuff. Well, this particular video got me thinking about what said mission may have been, and thankfully, with additional footage, old archived screenshots, questions answered by developers, and what was left over in other builds of the game, we now have a full sense of exactly what was going to happen in the first level. To understand what was going to happen, we need to talk about a handful of characters. Tim, the CEO of Time, Tim's friend, and Sam, the detective. Okay, probably don't actually have to talk about Sam the detective, he was just there in the corner. Now, for those of you who aren't very well versed in the cut content of A Hat in Time, you may have seen these two characters pop up in a lot of old fan art and other things about the game. Basically, Tim the CEO of Time was going to have an important role in the game's original lore. Tim, who was mentioned in some places to have originally been a cardboard cutout, was promoted to be the ultimate Time Lord of the universe. The previous Time Lord then told Tim, and I quote, "Just don't have a meltdown, okay?" So anyway, the story goes that Tim the CEO of Time had a meltdown due to stressing over trying to make sure he doesn't have one, and messed up time everywhere, and would have been up to Hat Kid to fix time after Tim messed it up. Tim's friend was going to be Tim's imaginary friend. He would have been used for two separate things, one of which was to transport Hat Kid to the Subcon Forest at the end of Chapter 1. The other purpose? Well, we're going to get to that in this very episode. So now you know the important parts, and basically the game's entire backstory leading up to this first level. So let's pause for a minute and take a look at the video I mentioned earlier to see what the player was going to be set up with. As you can see, there's not a whole lot the player starts out with when entering the level. Hat Kid spawns directly in front of the Seaside Spaghetti Cafe and is blocked from entering due to 3 laughing Mafia. She can't attack any of them due to her lack of her trusty umbrella, so what gives? Well, to answer that, we have a bit of footage and screenshots explaining in greater detail what would have gone on. In this screenshot, Hat Kid can be seen in front of the cafe smelling bad with a cake in front of her. No, I don't know why there's a cake. I do, however, know how she got smelly. In any version of the game, if you go around the corner of Seaside Spaghetti and jump in the conveniently provided dumpster, you'll start smelling bad, and a bunch of particles will be coming off of you. This is important because, in this next scene taken from the March 2013 trailer, you can see that the Mafia's attention is broken. If Hat Kid is smelly and walks up to the Mafia blocking the doorway, they'll notice and stop. Unfortunately, we don't have any footage of exactly what happens next, but we do know what happens after this. Hat Kid is captured and taken to the cellar of the cafe. As you can see in this picture, Hat Kid is assumed to have been trying to start something with the Mafia, to which the Mafia respond by taking her downstairs to teach her a lesson. However, before that can happen, Tim and Tim's friend appear in the basement, and, using his time powers, Tim freezes time. Tim's friend then uses this to turn the Mafia that brought Hat Kid down to the cellar into a cardboard cutout. This is where the first mission begins, the tutorial. Conveniently described to us by Hatboy, we know exactly how the combat tutorial for the game would have taken place. First off, Hat Kid would be given a choice of weapons. We unfortunately don't know what kinds of weapons these would have been, but we do know that no matter what the player would choose, Hat Kid would be left with an umbrella. Upon hitting the Mafia cutout, it would transform back into a regular Mafia, who is presumably rather unhappy about being turned into a cardboard cutout and then whacked in the face. At this point, the player would be tasked with defeating the Mafia goon before time would resume, and after it does so, Hat Kid gets alerted to the presence of a certain figure which I'm sure you're all aware of. This picture was actually used as a teaser for Mustache Girl's new model, if memory serves me correctly. Mustache Girl would ask Hat Kid if she wanted to take down some more Mafia, and the rest of the story, well, I'm sure you can probably figure that out. So, you may be wondering, why was there a need for an in-depth combat tutorial? Well, in the earliest stages of A Hat in Time's development, the game was originally made to be a hack and slash. The idea existed mostly in our mysterious first era of development, but the combat elements remained for a long time before boiling down to the regular hit slashes and targeted jump attacks we have in the final game. To specify, Hat Kid was originally going to be able to target characters, much like how the targeting system works in the 3D Zelda games. This targeting ability was around and bound to the prototype, and could still be activated in the console in the alpha of the game. As well as this, there was also Hat Kid's jump slash ability, which was seen up into the beta when Hat Kid would equip Thor's cap. As a matter of fact, there's still official artwork on the Hat in Time website that showcases this ability. Anyway, to summarize, upon entering the city of Calcite in Adventure, Hat Kid would be tasked with dumpster diving herself into becoming a smelly mess in order to distract the Mafia from the cafe owner that they were bullying, which would then lead Hat Kid to being captured and thrown into the cellar. This cellar encounter then serves as the battle debut for the game, teaching the player how to fight, which was a necessity due to how the early stages of A Hat in Time were more fighting based. The level would also serve as an introduction to Tim, Tim's friend, and Mustache Girl. Now usually this would be the part of the video where I explain why it was cut and what it transformed into, but before I do that, I want to take a look at the Cellar's development. You see, if you watched a few previous videos of mine, you may know that I'm in development of a harbor mod using the real geometry taken from a model Hatboy left over in the game files. Well, thanks to this model, I learned not only that the Cellar began development near the end of the harbor's lifespan, but also that the level was carried over into the Calcite era. To explain, the harbor model that I've been working on came with a piece of geometry that was never seen in any harbor footage. This cellar window. Upon looking at the cellar window and comparing it to the ones that are seen in the images and footage of the cellar, I can confirm that they're one and the same. Furthermore, earlier versions of the cellar all seem to have models and textures that existed in 2012, and even furthermore, there's no evidence of there being any such windows in the city of Calcite. What I'm trying to say is that even after the harbor map was dropped and the first level was restarted as the city of Calcite, there's enough evidence to suggest that the cellar was reused. The windows match up, the textures and models match up, and even by the later versions of it, there was still seemingly geometry from the early days of development. Now, what does all of this mean? To be honest, not that much. I just thought that the fact that the cellar was created for the harbor, but stayed around all the way through the Calcite era of development was cool. Some early models like the cafe tables and chairs made it all the way into the final game, but the idea that the geometry of a whole level stayed around as long as it did seems kind of cool to me. Anyway, on to the part where I look at why it got axed and what it got replaced with. And this one is probably a pretty easy one to figure out. In the prototype, the level that people got to play for Mafia Town was one where Tim would steal Hat Kid's umbrella, and, in getting it back, she would anger the Mafia and be forced to fight some of them. This later tutorial was, in many ways, similar to its predecessor. Immediately upon receiving her weapon, Hat Kid would be forced by Tim to fight Mafia. In the alpha release, this changes a bit. Hat Kid picks up her umbrella in the fountain, and is then alerted that Mustache Girl has been captured. The battle debut then begins with what's later known as Barrel Battle. In the beta, this changes a bit more, where Hat Kid receives her umbrella and then is given a way to safely test it out by killing a Mafia bot before the combat debut in the following act. The final version of the game is a lot like this, but the fast-moving Mafia bot is replaced by a much slower, easier-to-hit Mafia goon who runs away from the player in fear. Looking at things, I really enjoy how the combat debut of the game evolved over its 5 years of development, going from a single mission where the player is forced to fight an enemy that can hurt them seconds after receiving their weapon, to a much more lax and indirect tutorial where the player is given their weapon, a non-damaging enemy to test it on, and then a mission where the practice is put to the test in the following act. It just goes to show how much thought was put into making a gameplay mechanic tutorial without even having to tell the player that it's a gameplay mechanic tutorial. And that's why I respect so much about Gears for Breakfast. Well folks, it seems it's that time again where we draw to a close. Special thanks to Clone5184 for archiving a lot of the information I used in this video, and Hatboy for answering our questions when he did. If you'd like to see more of this kind of content, feel free to subscribe, and if you want a 50% chance to be notified about a new upload 3 to 5 days after I make it, you can hit the bell next to my name. If you have any questions or suggestions about what the next Betafied should be, feel free to let me know in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video.